Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 Ohioana Book Festival. I'm Laura Maylene Walter, representing the Ohio Center for the Book at Cleveland Public Library. I'm pleased to welcome you to the literary fiction panel of the Ohioana Book Festival. I'd like to start by thanking the festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find listed on the Ohioana website, ohioana.org. Thank you also to the festival's official bookseller, the Book Loft of German Village. You can get copies of all the books featured at the festival by going online to thebookloft.com. The Ohio Center for the Book at Cleveland Public Library is a designated affiliate of the Center for the Book at the Library of Congress and is dedicated to promoting and celebrating books, reading, literacy, and libraries to Ohio citizens and the book community at large. Today, the Ohio Center for the Book launched a new literary podcast called Page Count, and one of our first episodes features the Ohioana Library Association and the Ohio Literary Trail. So be sure to find Page Count wherever you listen to podcasts. And now I am pleased to welcome our authors to tonight's panel. Sara Siddiqui Chansarkar is an Indian American writer. Born to a middle-class family in India, she later migrated to the US and lives in New Albany, Ohio with her husband and son. Her stories and poems have appeared in numerous publications in print and online. Her work has been selected for Best Small Fictions 2022, and she is a winner of the ELJ Micro Creative Nonfiction Prize. She's a prose editor at Janus Literary and a submissions editor at Smoke Long Quarterly. Her debut short fiction collection, Morsels of Purple, was released in October 2021. She also has a chapbook that will be released in June 2022. Allegra Hyde is the author of the new novel Eleutheria, as well as the short story collection Of This New World, which won the John Simmons Short Fiction Award through the Ohio Short Fiction Award Series. A recipient of 3 Pushcart Prizes, Hyde's writing has been anthologized in Best American Travel Writing, Best of the Net, and Best Small Fictions. Hyde has received fellowships and grants from Breadloaf, Sewanee, the Elizabeth George Foundation, the Lucas Artist Residency Program, the Gentile Foundation, and the U.S. Fulbright Commission, and elsewhere. She currently teaches at Oberlin College. Jyotsna Sreenivasan is the author of the story collection These Americans, which won the Rosemary Danielle Fiction Prize at Minerva Writing Press, as well as the novel And Laughter Fell from the Sky. She's the recipient of an Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Award, an Artist Fellowship Grant from the Washington, D.C. Commission of the Arts, and was a fiction fellow at the Sewanee Writers Conference and a finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. She works as a middle and high school English teacher. Don Tassone, after a long career in the corporate world, Don Tassone has returned to his creative writing roots. He is the author of 2 novels and 6 short story collections. He and his wife Liz live in Loveland, Ohio. They have 4 children, and he is here at the festival with his novel, Francesca. So hello, authors. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I'm excited to chat with you. So I thought we could start by introducing you to our audience by introducing everyone to your book that you're here at the festival with. So I would love it if you could each give a brief pitch or description of your book and let us know what it's about and just give us a taste of the flavor of your book. So Sara, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. So this is my book, Morsels of Purple, and it was released in October 2021. And this is a collection of stories which crosses the geographical and cultural boundaries. So it is a cross-cultural collection of stories which are in the form of flash fiction. So the stories range from 1 page to maybe 3 pages, and each one is just maybe a paragraph long, but a story in its own. And it is the main characters of all the stories are women, and it's women across different countries. So my home country, India, and also there are characters based in the USA. And the stories are also about immigration and also mainly about the different relationships that women are in and the challenges we face day to day, and also touches sometimes, some stories touch upon social issues like misogyny and gender discrimination, childlessness, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Allegra, can you tell us a bit about Eleutheria?
Sure. And also, thank you everyone for coming. It's really nice to be a part of this festival. My novel, Eleutheria, is pictured here, is about a young woman named Willa Marks who decides that she wants to make a tangible impact on climate change. And so she travels to the Bahamas to join a compound of eco warriors who are determined to stop climate change. But what she finds there isn't quite what she expects. And she also finds herself reckoning with her own past, which includes a complicated relationship with a Harvard professor, and also the residual impact of her having doomsday prepping parents. So it's a book that's got a lot going on, but it's ultimately about what it would take to truly address climate change, and also about love, and also about the many facets of hope.
Great, thank you. Jyotsna, can you tell us a bit about your story collection, please?
Yeah, so my story collection is called These Americans, and it's a collection of 8 short stories and a novella. All of them are about Indian Americans. And the stories they're all different characters, but the stories are organized by the age of the second generation character. In other words, the child of immigrants. So in the first story, the new immigrant mom is giving birth to her American daughter. And in the second story, the second generation character is 7 years old. And by the end, by the novella, the immigrant character is elderly, and her daughter is middle-aged. So that's kind of how it's organized. I wanted to give people a sense of that second generation progress. And obviously it's just one, my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but I hope it gives people a flavor of what it's like to be in the second generation, because that is so important to American culture and American history. We so many of us are descended from immigrants, and most of us identify as American. When does that becoming American part happen? A lot of times I think it happens in the second generation. So that's why I like to focus on the second generation, besides the fact that I am second generation, so I'm a little biased.
Thank you. And finally, Don, can you tell us about your latest novel?
Glad to. This is the featured book this year. It's called Francesca, and it is a novel. It came out last summer, and the main story is set in the year 2055, so slightly in the future. It's a story about the first female pope, and her name is Jessica. She hails from Springfield, Missouri. She has grown up and spends most of her life in the St. Louis area. She's a mother and a wife, and she has an incredible journey, really, from her childhood through to the papacy. And the story basically traces that journey and the challenges that she faces along the way, and for the most part handles pretty well, but not all of them. So that's the primary story. But there's a deeper story here, and really the primary reason why I wrote the book, which is about purpose, our purpose. So what are we about? Why are we here? What's most important? What must we do? And these are the questions that Jessica, who ultimately takes the name Francesca as Pope, asks herself throughout her life as a girl, as a politician growing up, as a young person in politics, as a wife, as a mother, as the pastor of a small parish, and ultimately the leader of a great church. And she asks herself these questions along the way, and along the way, she invites her fellow Catholics to ask themselves these questions. In the process, she opens hearts and she opens minds and renews the church. One last thing about the book, and that is it also comes out of my strong conviction that women should be given the opportunity to lead in every realm of life, including religion.
All right, thank you. I'll definitely be asking about that later, because what I know of all of your books, the portrayal of women is important. And I think we can talk about that a bit later. But I loved hearing you each describe your books in your own words, because they're all very different, and yet each one has such a compelling hook on its own. And this reminds me, for our audience, you can feel free to participate in the chat if you have any comments, if you have any questions. We will be kind of tracking the questions throughout, so be sure to do that. But otherwise, I have plenty of questions for all of you. And I thought I would start with a really broad one about genre, because we are here at the festival as part of the literary fiction panel. And what is so great about each of your books is they all seem to be in very different forms. You know, we have a novel, a few novels, we have flash fiction, we have short stories. So I would just love to open up this question to anyone who'd like to jump in and talk about, you know, what does literary fiction, for our audience members who might not be as familiar with different genre breakdowns, what does literary fiction mean to you? How do you think your work might fit into that category? Or maybe in some cases, in what ways do you think your work departs from that category? So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say.
I think here we have a very diverse, and in terms of the fiction that we're writing. As you said, I'm writing flash fiction, and Jyotsna is writing short stories, and Allegra and Don both have been writing novels, and Don has been writing short stories too. So I think anything that is a story based on a character, and a character going through a certain series of events and there is some conflict and a resolution of that, and has to be a full arc, that at the end of the story something has changed in the character, or something has a story that's when it crosses from poetry to fiction to literary fiction. Because in poetry, I'm not that much of a poet, but in poems you'll just focus on one moment and just describe that. But in story, we really have to go through a series of changes and have to create a full arc. And for flash fiction, I can speak for my genre that I've been writing in. So it's actually fiction that is lesser than 1,000 words. So my longest story in the book is 1,000 words. And it can reach anywhere from 200 words to 1,000 words. That's flash fiction, but it has to be a complete story though on its own.
Coming at it from a cynical angle, you could say that it's just another kind of marketing label that's used to sort books and sell books. But another way to think of it is genres represent different traditions that books are within, and kind of what they're speaking to, what they're in conversation with. When it came to writing my own novel, in one sense, I think of my novel being in conversation with a lot of genres, because it's set in the near future and it has some speculative aspects to it. So it's in some ways speculative fiction, or even a little bit of science fiction. It's got some romance in it, so it's connected to the romance genre. It's got a little bit of history in it as well. There's a historical thread. Maybe that's historical fiction. But all of this for me was under the umbrella of literary fiction, which I think of as fiction that has a higher artistic aim. That's not just for pure pleasure, pure entertainment that we kind of consume and then maybe forget about, but is fiction that's trying to show us something about the world or about ourselves, and is asking us to kind of engage with ideas in that way.
I think that's perfect. That's such a good description of it. And I'm wondering if I can steal that in the future as a writer who really struggles to talk about what genre my work is. I think that's great. Don and Jyotsna, what would you like to add something?
Well, I wasn't sure what to say, but when I heard Allegra talk about how you're in conversation with a bunch of different genres, I really like that. I also have kind of maybe a not super comfortable relationship with the words literary fiction. I actually don't have an MFA, which is a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I don't have an MFA. I chose not to get one many years ago because I felt like the kind of writing, and this was my very young, very limited viewpoint, but I felt like the kind of writing that was coming out was more focused on kind of impressive language and less focused on character and connecting with the heart of the reader. And that's what I like to do. That's what I try to do. It's not always, successful, but I like to focus on characters and see if I can connect with the reader in a kind of an emotional way, which I feel like is maybe not really in fashion in terms of literary fiction, although I'd like to hear Allegra, and I mean, I'd like to hear other people's points of view about that, because I'm like, why are people not focusing on emotional connection with the reader? But maybe people are, and I'm just not like aware of that. I don't know. But I do love the idea of, because I mean, I know Laura's book has speculative elements, and I love the idea of reaching, feeling free. I mean, in some ways, literary fiction gives you the freedom to experiment a little bit. So I do like that aspect of it. So anyway, I'll stop there.
I would just add and pick up off of a couple of points, especially that Allegra was making, that as I think about why I write, why am I doing this? It's really to invite people to think more deeply, to feel something more deeply. And that's what great writing does for me. It always has. And so most of my stories, and they're mainly short stories, and of those, mainly shorter stories, as Sara's writing a lot of flash fiction, come out of two things, really the combination of two things. One is something happening in the world or that's happened in my life. And the other is some larger idea, some theme. That usually that reality, that thing that's happening in the world helps illustrate and illuminate. And I think in that way, most of my writing, and most of that is short stories, does kind of take on this higher order, if you will, more provocative role in helping people and inviting people, I should say, to think a little more deeply about themes like compassion, themes like sorrow, loss, joy, the things that we're going through every day in life. And the form that takes is kind of all over the place. So I, like several people have said, am writing things that are probably very traditional and classically literary fiction, but I'm also writing science fiction. I'm also writing fantasy. I've had more than 300 short stories published now and only 2 novels. I think short stories in particular allow you that kind of freedom. So I feel like I'm dabbling a bit, but always coming out of that kind of that combination of something happening in the world and some larger idea. Someone described my stories as modern secular parables, and I suppose they are. They always have some broader point, and that's what draws me to this type of fiction.
Yeah, Don, hearing you talk about the different forms things take, and maybe your vision at the beginning for what you want to express, and then what form it comes out when you write it, makes me curious about just the writing process and the process of putting these particular books together for you. So I would love to hear from each of you, with this particular book, how long did you work on it? Is this final published form, is that aligned with the vision that you had at the beginning, or did some things change, or maybe many things changed along the way? So I would love to hear just kind of from the conception of the idea to where you are today at the Ohioana Book Festival, and how your books came together. Jyotsna, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, the stories in this collection, I have been writing stories for about 20 years, I guess, but not all, and not all the stories that have been published are in this collection. So several years ago, I thought, oh, I have quite a few stories out there. Maybe I should put them in a collection. And at the time, my agent wasn't even interested in looking at my short stories. She just wanted novels. And so I started, so you want to know how this came together, not how I got it published, right?
Yeah, the writing process.
The writing process. Okay, let me stick with the question. So yeah, so I decided that it was going to be focused on second generation. I have other stories that are not focused on second generation. So I put them together, had to figure out how to organize it. I actually originally organized it backwards by putting the novella first and then going back in age, and that didn't work. I didn't like that. And so I flipped it.
what was your revision process like? Was it something
Mhm.
you worked on slowly over time? Were you trying to
Mhm.
publish the individual stories along the way, or was
Oh
it?
yeah. Yeah. So I had no idea that these were all going to be in a collection when I first started writing stories. You know, the stories were written and revised over the course of years, and some of them were published fairly quickly. In other words, a couple of years after I first started writing stories. And other stories, I worked on them for years, revising them, cutting them, reorganizing them, and so forth. And the novella was actually originally a novel, and that's the one that was a finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize. And so, but it just wasn't really working as a novel. It had too many characters, and I didn't know, people couldn't figure out where it was going. And so that was a process of really just stripping out, just figuring out, I need to focus on just these two characters. I actually combined a couple characters into one, and was very fascinated by the novella format. So I thought I would try that. Does that, am I answering your question?
Yes, you did great.
Okay.
But, so Sara, since you also have a collection of, well, flash fiction, was your process similar? Can you tell us about how this collection came to be?
Yeah, so I was writing these stories whenever I got that. I have a day job, so whenever I got time over the weekends or in the evenings, I just used to write stories with. And I was more of an internet writer, so I sent stories to online journals, and they just got published. And I didn't write with a lot of ambition of someday putting together a collection, but once I had like more than 50 stories, I took a pause and I took a look at them like, okay, there is a thread running across all of them. It's like all of the characters are women. And although they are in a very distinct setting, or the plots are different, but still it's about the relationships and the challenges that women face, being a mother, daughter, or a friend, wife, whatever it might be. Then okay, I had these stories all together, but then I also had this challenge in front of me, that do I divide it into two books or two parts, that okay, these stories are based in India and have Indian characters, and then some of the stories have American characters, and then there is also a hybrid of of women who have migrated from India to the USA. So I thought of dividing into that sort of a thing, or maybe based on progression, that maybe first is the younger characters, and then middle-aged, and then more mature women. But then I just thought that I don't want any kind of a progression, and I just thought that how I envisioned this book was sort of a quilt. So I thought that, okay, every story is different and it's a different pattern or color, but I thought that that's how I would sprinkle them around. So what I've done is that maybe two stories focusing on childlessness is two stories would be like that. Two stories will be based on gender discrimination that women face. Two would be about some marriages that are not going well. So that's how I just picked stories, like two stories here, two stories there. So because I just didn't want the reader to think like, okay, these are different stories, but the same theme is going on and on. So I've just sprinkled them across, and that's how this came to be. And I wasn't sure whether I was doing the right thing or not, but I guess it did work at some level.
I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing or not. I feel like that is just the writer's constant mantra, right? From day one until publication, because sometimes you just can't know. It's a creative process. But I love the thought of your stories, of like viewing them as a quilt. I think that's really fascinating, because I know ordering a story collection is it's a big decision, and it's complicated, and it can change the whole tone of the book. And as Jyotsna said, discovering, having to flip the order of her collection, I find that really interesting. But let's move on to the novelist. So for the novelists here today, how did your process evolve over time as you worked on your books?
The novel is Francesca, and it's just the second novel I've written. It's a piece of long form writing, and I would just distinguish that from the process that I typically use for most of my writing, which is short stories. I write one a week. This took about 2 years, and I have a business background, and not just a business background, but also in a large corporation. And I typically take kind of a left brain approach to this, a linear approach to this. I'm fairly new at writing, creative writing, actually. And by that, I mean, I began with what's called a log line, right? It's just kind of almost your jacket copy, if that. Very brief description of your book. A synopsis, a one-page synopsis of what you're trying to accomplish in the book, the story you're trying to tell, which is hard, right? To distill that down to one page. And then from there, dividing it up into chapters and doing just a couple of bullet points per chapter, kind of a chapter outline, if you will. Once I've done that, and I typically would vet the synopsis with some kind of trusted readers, which I did in this case, to get their feedback on, does this hunt, does it flow, are there gaps, this kind of thing. Then I began writing, and that whole writing process then probably took me 18 months or so. The drafting of it didn't take long at all. I'm a fast writer. I enjoy writing. It's the rewriting that kills you, right? And so I would say that a good year or more of that was rewriting. Hemingway said the only kind of writing is rewriting. And in fact, as a point of interest, and this might sound kind of odd, I've actually, in some cases, for my stories and these novels, continued rewriting the manuscripts after they've been published. That's how bizarre this whole thing is sometimes. But it's the rewriting, I think, that really makes us better. So a lot of it was spent rewriting, and something really interesting happened during that process for me. And in the case of both of these novels, and a novella that I'm now working on as well, and that is the story changed dramatically. The outline changed. I added more chapters. I added far more words. And what was happening is the characters were coming to life, and they were leading me in new directions, and conflicts were emerging, or they were deepening, and a sense of place maybe that wasn't so important when I started has become more important as the story has progressed. These kinds of things. And the story became larger. The story became much larger. So going from, say, 60,000 words in the initial draft to 85,000 words, that kind of thing, going from, I can't remember exactly how many chapters, but probably 30% more chapters ultimately from the original outline. So that's been my process, and it does take time. I would contrast that, by the way, with the short stories, including especially the flash fiction. Sara was saying, flash fiction is tricky because it can be only 100 words or so, or maybe a couple of hundred words, but you've got to pack a lot into that. You've got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you have to tell a story in the process. So I try to write one story a week. That keeps me sharp. I feel like I'm kind of on two tracks here, the long form and the shorter form writing, and one somehow helps the other. It kind of oils the other's track. For me anyway, it's a balance. But with short stories, my approach is dramatically different. I focus on one thing and only one thing, and that is the storyline itself. So what's the plot? I try to get that down, and I get it down as succinctly as I possibly can. And then and only then I begin writing dialogue and developing a character or characters, or maybe there's a hint of a subplot if there's enough room for that, and building out the conflict, those kinds of things, scene descriptions. And so I kind of hang lights on the Christmas tree, if you will. But those are my two basic approaches. And for the novel, again, I say it was about a 2-year process.
I definitely hear what you're saying, Don, about rewriting, and also about not being able to let things go. I think I'm definitely someone who, even after things are published, I still want to go back into them. And I take some comfort in the fact that other authors do this. I know I read that Zadie Smith, for instance, like before even reading from a published book will make line edits and then kind of read from a slightly adjusted version. So if Zadie Smith's doing it, it's okay. And that's also kind of relevant to how this book came into being, because the dirty secret of this novel is that it was actually a short story before it became a novel. For my first book, which was a story collection called Of This New World, one of the stories in it was called Shark Fishing, and it was about an environmental compound in the Bahamas. And even though that story was the longest story in the collection, I still felt like there was more I wanted to talk about. There were these themes of environmental activism, neocolonialism, and other topics that there was just more there to unpack. And so I couldn't get that story out of my head. And I decided to go further with it, take the characters further. And so I did. And it took many, many years. I think writing the novel was about a 5-year process. I'm someone who likes to write by hand and who, and is also a slow typer. So that just, I think, might have slowed down the process a little bit. But I don't know, that's what it kind of took to really investigate the hearts and minds of my characters and make sure that I was saying everything that I wanted to say. Yeah.
I love that. And for some reason, it's almost comforting to me whenever I hear a writer's form has shifted drastically, such as a short story turns into a novel, or even a novel draft turns into a novella or a short story. It's almost as if it wants to exist in the world, right? And you just have to do the work to figure out how it really needs to be presented to the world. And along those lines, I love that Don and Allegra both talked about this drive to revise or rewrite even after publication. And I identify with that so much. I mean, I know when I do a reading, I absolutely mark up the book. Almost always. And part of that might be because I don't know if you agree, but reading out loud is just so different from reading internally on the page. But I'm curious if Sara or Jyotsna, if do you want to revise after your book is in final form? Do you let it go? Are you better about that than some of us might be? What is your take on that?
I mean, I definitely, when I'm reading out loud, I have my copy that is marked up and all that. And then there are lots of times I'll be walking around and I'm like, oh, I should do this with that story. And I'm like, wait a minute, that story's already published. I can't do anything about it. I mean, it was kind of nice because with this, when you do a short story collection, yeah, it was published in a literary magazine, but now you get to rework it again. So that was kind of nice to revisit and to see how they kind of all fit together and how do I want to deepen these stories. And so, yeah, I think there is that urge, which to be like, oh, I wonder if I should, too late.
Yeah, I wish too so many times now also when I read the stories in this book, and sometimes like maybe I did not end in the right place, I would have ended with some other image or at some other emotion, or the sentence, maybe I should have split it into 2 sentences for more impact. Or so it's all the time that I read my book. I know it's been published now, and I wish that, although I have edited it so many times, numerous times before finally sending it out of publication, but I still feel that, yes, this could have been a little more better. This could have been expanded a little more, but yeah, so that doubt is always there.
Yeah, what is a writer if not full of doubt at all times? I might just be projecting my own thoughts. Hopefully you're not full of doubts at all times. But a few of you have mentioned your jobs or careers outside of writing creatively. And so I'm always so interested to hear about writers, their day jobs, how that outside work interacts with, conflicts with, or assists your creative work. So I would love to hear about, as much as you'd like to share about jobs you've either had or have now, and most of all, how have you maintained your creative work over this time, especially if you have other responsibilities, as almost everyone does.
So I am currently a creative writing professor at Oberlin College. And so, and I teach creative writing. Yeah, I said that. And so I'm really lucky that I get to kind of be involved in literary things as part of my job. And it definitely fuels my work to investigate what it means to be, what it means to create a character on the page, what is setting when talking to students. And so it's definitely a kind of symbiotic relationship, working with students as they figure out how to tell their stories, as they find their own voices. I will say some other jobs that I have had, though, on my journey to being a professor include being a baker, being a bellhop, being a waiter, among other things. And I would like to think that all of those jobs have in some way served my writing.
Well, my background, as I mentioned, is in the corporate world, but I was an English major in college, and thought for a while I was going to be a journalist, and so was actually a communication major for a while there as well, and did a lot of news writing when I was in college. I've always loved writing, but went into public relations work, working for a big company, P&G, and I spent my entire career there, 31 years. So I did a lot of writing as part of that job. It was core to the work, but it was business writing. And so when I retired from P&G and was exploring other various options that I might want to take, and I knew writing would be one of those. I wrote a couple of short stories. I had them in mind, had them in mind for many years, decades even, and I wrote them down. I'm a very good writer, I think. I thought I was anyway. And I shared them with a couple of people, and they thought they were really awful. And I had to agree with that. One person said, "This looks like a memo." So what I realized was, as good as my writing was, as effective as I was a writer, as part of my work, it's business writing. It's a different kind of writing. And if I want to do this, I'm going to have to go back to school. I'm going to have to think differently about writing and learn or relearn how to write creatively again. So I went away to a 1-week workshop in a place called New Harmony, Indiana, which is near Evansville. And I hung out there with a bunch of 20-somethings for a week. And it was a wonderful reimmersion in kind of the fundamentals of creative writing. The things that I knew at one point and practiced at one point, but it kind of put away for all those years. And after that, I began writing creatively. I spent the entire summer working on one piece, which is a very long piece, which was nominated for the Pushcart Prize. In fact, didn't win, but was nominated, and was published by a literary journal, kind of a funky avant-garde literary journal. And that really gave me a boost in the arm and a shot in the arm, shot of confidence. And I just kept writing, and I haven't looked back. But what it taught me was a little bit of a sense of humility. And, I was kind of at the top of my game, if you will. And I estimated when I retired, I had written about 10 million words, and I was very proud of that. But I hadn't written one word that was really creative, like the kind of work that we're doing and discussing here tonight. So I think it is about starting over. And part of the reason I mention that is it may seem like a left turn. It may seem like a radical departure from everything I'd done before. But as I think Sara was mentioning, as we go into the writing process, as we write these stories, long or short, we bring ourselves into them, and our experiences and our skills, for sure, as writers, which have to get better and better and better the more we exercise them in practice. But what we're really bringing into the stories is our own stories, is our own lives. And so I would just say to anybody who may be out there and thinking about writing, maybe for the first time, or switching from kind of treating this as a hobby to a real regimen and a practice, it can be done. It can be done. And the most important thing, I think, in addition to just practicing the craft, is to bring yourself into it and to make sure that your stories are authentic. And after all, I think that in writing, we're telling our own stories, and our lives are important, and the details of our lives are important, and they're worth recording and conveying. And so that's been my experience. It may be a little different from others on the panel tonight, but I just thought I'd mention that by way of saying, hey, it's never too late. And no matter what you've been doing, it counts. It's part of you and part of what you bring into the writing process.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Now, Sara, if I'm not mistaken, you have an interesting career background as well. Would you like to share with us?
I don't have an English major or an MFA. I have an electronics engineering degree, and that's what my day job is in the computer science. And so that's what I am, an application development manager. And I just wrote as a hobby, as a hobby. When I came to this country, I had this so many thoughts about immigration, and then my son was little, so I just started a blog to write about his childhood, just to capture those moments, like his pranks and his moods and everything. I just had a mommy blog, and that's what I was writing. And I never shared and nothing with anybody else. It was just very few people who knew about this. And then when I got more exposed to writing, then I saw that then one day somebody asked me to join Twitter. I said, okay, I'll join Twitter. So I joined Twitter, and I saw so many writers, because I was following a few writers, and then I got a thread of so many writers, and I saw that there was just a world of opportunity out there. And people encouraged me that, why don't you, send out your work out to publication? I said, no, who would read my work? I don't even have an English degree or something. Or and I always, in the back of my mind, I had something that after I retire, or I'll leave my job and someday I'll pursue an MFA or an English major, and after that I'll write my book. I want to write my book, but I will write someday when I have time. So I said, okay, I'll just continue my hobby of writing short stories. And as Don said, that once a publication accepts a story of yours, that's like a shot in the arm, like, okay, a boost, that it gives you a kind of an uplift, that okay, someone likes your work, you submitted, and they sifted through the queue of submissions and they picked your story. So okay, there must be somebody, so some value in that. So that's where I just kept on submitting, and I was surprised that my stories were so in the course of this journey. I also started writing fiction. Like, I just started nonfiction at first, as my story or my son's story, my life story. But then I got tired of writing of it, because my son was growing up and my immigration was not, I was already in this country. I had adapted to it. So like, okay, now I can start writing fiction. And that also gained a lot of acceptance. So that's where I just started writing stories. And my stories are all based on reality. So it's all, though everything is not autobiographical, but it's also, I think, as writers, what we do is that we apply our imagination to the experiences we've had in life. So that's what I did. And as far as my education goes, I think that engineering degree gives me that logical approach, that okay, I can't jump from point A to point D without explaining what happens at B and C. So that's that logical algorithmic approach is what I think that is in my mind, that something that my education gave me. And that's, I think, a good an advantage that I have, that I can clearly see a loophole, that okay, this is where I need to fix my story.
And Jyotsna, is there anything you would like to add about your work life and your creative life?
Yeah, so I since I don't have an MFA, I never went the route of trying to be a creative writing professor, which I know is really, it's a hard route. So Allegra, I know it's hard what you're doing. So I for many years I was a writer and editor with nonprofit organizations in Washington, D.C. And then I worked at a university as a science writer. And I would write, before work, after work. Well, before I had kids, it was not that big of a deal. There's lots of time, but after I had kids, it was a lot more difficult to find the time to write. And I would wake up. I'm a morning person, so I would wake up at 5 a.m. and write for an hour before I went to work, because that was kind of like my quiet time. Nobody was bothering me. Nobody needed me. And so I did that for many years. And now I'm a middle school and high school English teacher, which I love. I've been doing this for about 10 years. And so I do get the longer vacations, so I can write during the vacation. Sometimes I'll write on the weekends. I cannot write before work anymore, because teaching is really intense. And so I get up and I just kind of have to mentally prepare myself to go into work. So I'm not writing in the morning anymore. But so, I mean, in one sense, I really like not being in the creative writing world because there's no pressure to publish. Nobody cares whether I published anything at all or got good reviews or whatever. So I don't have to deal with that pressure. So I like that. I do crave community, so I do try to now trying to go to conferences or connect with people online. There's this thing called critiquecircle.com where you can like submit a story and people will critique it. And I think I might have mentioned this to you, Sara, and then I never sent you the link, critiquecircle.com. But anyway, so trying to connect with other writers outside of work, since I'm not connecting with them at work.
Do you have critique partners? Do you have close readers in your life? Do you have someone you consider your best or favorite critic? So let's take it away. Maybe Don, would you like to start?
Sure, yeah. I have a small group, kind of a circle of people who are confidants, people who are really talented writers in their own right, of course, and whose writing I greatly admire. And they're really kind of across the board in terms of a very diverse group of writers, the kind of writing they do. But they're also all truth tellers. They're also people who I know are going to tell me the truth, and some brutally so, but I can take it. And that's what I need. I find it incredibly helpful, but also very inspiring. And so I do the same thing for them. And I think that, kind of one hand washing the other. And I think in giving feedback to people, I think that's a part of our own writing process and our own formation as writers as well. So yeah, I have a really great trusted group. It may go up or down by a person or two, but I think I've got kind of the 6 or so folks who I really find very valuable. And they also tend to turn it around pretty quickly, which I'm kind of an impatient writer. So I appreciate that as well.
Anyone else want to jump in about community?
I also find it so helpful and important to get feedback and to have artistic partnerships. And I think I don't necessarily have a number one best reader, because I try to ask for critiques from different people depending on the work and what the work needs. And so if I know someone, say, is particularly good at at plot, and I just feel like plot needs to be boosted in a particular work, then I might ask them to give it a read. But I think so many pieces of writing are only as good as the kind of community that supports them, and it's not just about the single genius author that's creating it, but the many voices and opinions that go into helping shape a particular work.
I have a list of about 20 more questions, but we are already getting close to time. But we do have a question in the chat that I wanted to get to quickly. So the question surrounds, how do you determine your audience when you're writing, and do you write to or for a specific audience? And on the business side, how do you try to market or reach those people? So I think those are two different questions, but I think you can answer in whatever way makes sense to you. Maybe you have your own philosophy about the marketing side and how that does or does not interact with your creative side. So I'm very curious about that. Do you write to a certain audience, and then how do you approach the marketing angle with your books?
I don't write with an audience in mind. I write what stories come to me, because I think if I am forced to write for a particular genre or for a particular audience, that would not bring up the best stories. So I write what I want to write, and I think that's gaining acceptance, because that's what people think, that who would care about the story. But I think if a story is well told, it resonates with the readers, and with someone at least, and we think that we are just a kind of a person, but there are many people like us. So there is more universality than we can imagine in stories. I think any writing that's well written and has a heart and a beating heart, and it will be accepted by people.
I tend to take a different approach to that question. whether it's long form or short form writing. So in the case of short form writing, short stories, I take my cue from O. Henry, who was the master of the modern short story, right? And somebody asked him, how do you do it? What's your advice? He said, there are two rules. One is write what you like. There is no second rule. So I think it comes down to that. You've got to really fall in love with your own writing. And if you don't fall in love with it, who else will? So I think that's a key part of how I think about writing short stories. But in terms of the longer form writing, the novels, it's very much that same way to start, but ultimately you're trying to sell this novel. And I think who that will appeal to and then how you reach them comes about. It evolves over time. And there's so many different tools, of course, for reaching audiences these days. In the case of Francesca, my featured book, what I have found is that everyone from social progressives to dissident Catholics to feminists. It's a broad spectrum, and so I've tried to gear some of my marketing, if you will, some of the PR and marketing I've done behind that book to that. But what I have found in the case of all of my books, and I've now had 8 published, is the most powerful tool I have is my own email list. These are the people who I know, who know me, who trust me, hopefully in some cases even like me. And I'm building a following that way, a fan base, if you will. So I'm basically having to recreate myself and to rebrand myself as an author. This is a fairly new role for me. And what better way to do that than reach out to the people who know me? And so I've got a list of about 800 people in total, including former business colleagues, who I reach out to each and every time I have a new book published. And there are other tools too and other ways to market books, of course. And if you're lucky enough, you've got a big publisher who can get behind it and put some marketing muscle behind it. But I haven't found that publisher just yet. So I'm doing this on my own. But I would say that kind of that core is building off of personal relationships you have, contacts you have.
Absolutely. I think that also goes for authors who are published by large houses as well. We will have to wrap up in just a minute, so I do want to give Allegra and Jyotsna time to answer the question as well, if you have any either audience or marketing insights related to your own work.
I do agree with Sara and Don that you're kind of writing what you want to write. I also think about, I do have like some specific people that I sometimes think about, like I have a best friend from college and she's just a no nonsense person. And she kind of can see through fakeness, you know what I mean? And so I'm thinking, okay, well, what would Joyce think of this? Is this true? Is this or am I trying to impress? Like she could see through that kind of thing. Because I'm trying to connect with that particular reader, the heart of that particular reader. And in terms of marketing, I don't know. I haven't figured that part out yet. The hope is that if you are connecting with that reader, then you're connecting with multiple people, like each person you're connecting with, and it's an individual thing. But so, yeah, I do kind of have certain people in mind from my life that I'm thinking, okay, this person can see through the hype and get to what the truth is. And am I speaking to the truth?
In terms of audience, I too try to write something that I'll enjoy, but I also was just thinking about readers who would be up for thinking about climate change ultimately. And maybe it's because that reader is feeling kind of hopeless about what can be done, or is feeling kind of just not knowing what to think about climate change because it's such a giant, complex issue. And it's not that my book can answer every question at all, but I hoped that the novel synthesized science, sociology, imagination to kind of offer some commentary on climate change and also offer some hope about moving forward and problem solving. And I think my hope was that the audience I was speaking to would be receptive to that. In terms of marketing, I think I try to use good old Twitter.
Well, this hour has flown by. I could definitely talk to all of you for another hour easily. I unfortunately did not get to the question about the portrayal of women in your books, but I think our audience will just have to go and buy all your books from the Book Loft to figure that out for themselves. So thank you all so much. Thanks again to all our panelists, Sara Siddiqui Chansarkar, Allegra Hyde, Jyotsna Sreenivasan, and Don Tassone. You can get copies of their books from the Book Loft of German Village at bookloft.com. Be sure to support our bookstores, especially in this virtual environment. Thank you again to our festival sponsors and partners. Thank you everyone for joining us. And please check out the Ohioana website for all of this year's programming for the book festival. Thank you so much, everyone. I had a great conversation with you, and good luck.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.